Hi, Jonathan here. This video is a recording of a virtual presentation I recently did for a friend of mine who now works at ICE Mobile. The topic is the WTF of working from home. As somebody who's worked from home for many years and loves it, I wanted to take the opportunity to offer some advice and some suggestions and some tips on how to cope with it for those of us who maybe aren't as comfortable with the prospect of working from home and the challenges that that brings. I hope you'll find this video interesting.
We met in Bugaboo, which was my job before ICE Mobile, when Jonathan was my manager. Currently, he's working for Lana, so 100% remote work for a Spanish fintech startup. And he kindly agreed to do this talk for us as an experienced digital nomad to guide us a little bit around what it means to work from home and what it doesn't mean. And now, to Jonathan.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the WTF of WFH, and maybe we can eliminate some of that. So obviously we've all been doing some remote work for a while. The whole world pretty much has, and I think it's created a lot of confusion. So I want to talk today a little bit about some concerns that it brings up, why even given these concerns I still love remote work. And for those of us who maybe don't love it as much as me, how we can cope with it to some extent, and then some of the reasons for and against it from a personal standpoint as well as from a business standpoint. But before that, let me just talk about myself a little bit. So as Marta said, my name is Jonathan. I've been working remote for several years in different companies. We'll talk about that in a moment. And currently I'm the core tech lead at a company called Lana, which is, as she mentioned, a Spanish fintech that, although the headquarters are in Madrid, Spain, where our core market is in Latin America, Mexico, Chile, and Peru. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience working remote. My first remote work, I worked for a small company in Kansas. I'm American, if you couldn't tell from my accent. So I was working in the Midwest United States at a company making a spam filter for email. And we had a feature we had to get out quickly, so the three of us on the team did a 1 week, or it might have been 2 weeks, I don't recall the details, work from home sprint. We worked long hours, worked at home to avoid the commute time and to focus without interruptions, and we got the feature out the door. About a year later, that company was acquired by a company that didn't have even an office. Like their headquarters was a post office box. So at that point, we all transitioned to an all-remote team. That gave me the opportunity to move, so I went to Mexico for what was supposed to be 1 year to learn Spanish, and I came back about 2 years later. At that point, I sold my house because I decided that I liked living in different places, so I sold my house, sold my car, sold everything I had, and traveled the world as a digital nomad. So for a few years, I traveled Europe, South America, South Africa, Central America. Several of those places I went more than once. And then, as often happens, I suppose, I met a girl, and the traveling kind of ended a little bit. After we got married, we moved to the Netherlands, where I currently live. I moved here for Booking.com. They gave me a good offer. I had offers in several places, but we chose this one primarily for the airport and the central location. It was a good place to travel from. I was only at Booking.com for about a year, and then I moved to a company called Teamwork, which is based in Ireland. And they are a probably 50% remote company. They do have offices in Cork, Ireland, but they also have a lot of remote people, and I was one of the remote people because I was still in the Netherlands. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the dynamics of mixing remote and non-remote later on. Then I worked at Bugaboo, which is where, of course, I met Marta, as she mentioned. Of course, Bugaboo was not remote, but we were distributed, at least initially, in the sense that we had teams in India and in Bulgaria and in Belgium, in addition to our headquarters in Amsterdam. So some of the dynamics of remote work definitely applied there. And then starting beginning of this year, in January, I moved to a company called Lana, which basically we do a a bank and a mobile app is the concept of our product, primarily for people in Latin America where banking is not ubiquitous. So all in all, I've done remote work for about 9 years in 3 different companies and quite a large variety of geographic locations. So let's start with the fun, or maybe less fun part, the remote challenges. And I hope this can be a little bit interactive. Obviously, as I'm expecting you've all started to learn, remote work isn't all sunshine and rainbows. So I'd like to hear from anybody why remote work sucks in your perspective.
I have something to say. Like for me, especially, this coronavirus working from home all the time can be very tiring. Especially in the beginning, I found it more tiring than what I normally did, which was 4 days at work and 1 day at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really appreciated my at-home time, and now not so much.
Yeah. Okay.
I have the problem, or had the problem in the beginning, that it was way easier to get distracted. Perhaps because there was no social, like checking or social pressure to keep working, or it was a bit easier to just look out of the window for a long period of time, or just be less focused in general.
Yeah, good.
For me, it's easier to reach your colleagues when you're in office. So sometimes, yeah, it takes some time before someone answers, and usually I just walk into the person, like come up to person and asking my questions. So this little bit sometimes slows down my work.
Yeah, very good.
For me, it's that switch between I'm now at my house and then I'm at the office. Being able to say, so where's the boundaries of when am I supposed to play which role in my life?
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, that's good. Practically everything that you have all said are exactly things I've heard before. Most recently from my wife, who is, of course, now working remote for the first time. I've done it for many years. She has not. But let's talk about some of those things. So I think you've already touched on many of the things I was going to discuss. Less social interaction. Nobody actually mentioned this one, but this is one of the things that I hear the most when talking to other people about remote work or the possibility of remote work, and that is that they're afraid that they're going to miss talking to people. If I work from home all the time, I'm just going to talk to my cat or whatever the situation is. So. And then this is one you did mention. It's difficult to focus when you're at home, or it can be, I should say. I think that goes on. I'm sorry I didn't catch the names of who was speaking, but I think that the last respondent mentioned not knowing when to switch modes between work and play, so to speak. I think that's a big part of the difficulty with focusing. And just reflecting from what my wife has told me, she found it difficult the first few weeks working at home. That she just felt she was obligated to clean the house if she saw something out of place, or to make a meal, or water the plants or something like that. So just being accustomed to the normal routine of home life, it was difficult for her to switch to that work mode while she was physically at home. And the one that you guys already mentioned is it's difficult to collaborate. Previously, when you're in the office, you could just walk over to someone's desk. Or catch up over coffee or whatever. It's much harder to do that, obviously, when you're in physically different places. I don't know if this affects your company at all, but time zone challenges are a common problem with remote teams. And of course, it can be a problem when you're not on a remote team. It was a problem at Bugaboo, even though we weren't remote per se. We were just distributed in the sense that we had eight or 10 employees in India and then others in Europe. So that can be a challenge. Remote work doesn't work for everyone in the sense that I think that there's a certain personality or temperament that appreciates it, and other people don't. As you've probably guessed, I really enjoy it, but my wife hasn't had the same experience, and I definitely have had friends who've done it and hated it. So I think it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And then from a business standpoint, there's evidence to suggest that remote companies grow more slowly. I don't know if that relates, if that's relevant to anybody on this call. I can talk about that more later if it is, but it is definitely a challenge that's worth mentioning for remote work. Now, let's talk about the advantages. I'd like to hear from you guys again. We know why you think remote work sucks. Does anybody think remote work is awesome for other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, it's much easier for me to focus on something for a longer time. Like if I want an hour just to focus on one thing, I can basically choose to do that. Whereas at work, if somebody like Andre comes to your desk because it's so easy to reach me, then no, it's but yeah, you have more stints of focus time, I would say. I like that.
I agree. Yeah.
I like that my commute is really short.
Yes.
So I have to walk down the steps to mine.
Definitely.
And I'm also very, very productive.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I can sleep a little longer in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, that's connected to commute, but it's a nice perk.
Good. Well, I think you've already touched on some of the things I was going to mention. Better focus is my #1 reason for preferring remote work. And I like to mention time zone differences here, actually. So right now I work with a large number of people in Latin America, which means that in my morning, they are not interrupting me at all because they're sleeping, which means that I can spend the entire morning focused and zoned in on one particular problem. The downside maybe is that the afternoons are taken up by all of my meetings. So around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, my productive workday is done, and it's all meetings and dailies and collaboration. But I really like the first 4 or 5 hours of my day because I can just focus. I like the greater comfort. This depends a lot, maybe on the company you work for and how accommodated they are to, say, getting you a desk and a chair and lighting that you like. But of course, when you're at home, you can personalize your work environment as much as you want, or work from the sofa if you like, or the patio, or the beach, or whatever. So I really like that advantage of remote work. Of course, it's harder to work on the beach right now since we're kind of confined, but generally speaking, that's probably true. Better social time, maybe not right now, but generally speaking, I like to choose who I spend my social time and social energy with rather than random colleagues. I don't necessarily trust my boss to select my best friends. Maybe they're good colleagues, but they aren't necessarily people I want to spend a lot of social time with. So, again, not related right now during COVID, but generally speaking, when you work remote, it's easier to travel or take an extended holiday. And even my wife has done that before COVID. When we would go on holiday, sometimes she would take an extra week and work remotely for that week. And so, some companies are flexible enough to do that, even if you're not a remote company. I don't know how your company is, but that's one advantage of at least being remote flexible. And as you guys already mentioned about the commute time, you can save time and money on the commute. Also, I find that I tend to eat better when I'm at home because, well, it helps that my wife makes better meals than I buy at fast food restaurants. That may not always be true for everybody. Maybe some people eat worse. Maybe you just eat a bag of chips for lunch when you're at home and you actually eat a real meal outside. So it could go either direction there.
I think the food at Ice Mobile is so good that I think everybody's eating worse now.
Okay. Yeah. And then a little bit counterintuitive. I think that, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, but I think that remote forces a higher quality of communication. So I won't get into that right on this slide, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. So how do we make the best of the situation? I think every presentation requires an inspirational quote. So here's this one. I have no idea who Robert South is, but congratulations, Robert, you're in my presentation now. So let's talk first about social interaction, because this is always the one that people talk to me about the most. So it's one that I prepared a lot. So it is true that we have less social interaction in terms of quantity when we work from home. But I think this actually leads to better social interaction. And this is of course, my personal perspective. There's no right or wrong way to view this. So if you disagree with me, that's fine. But I find that few work relationships are truly meaningful and long-lasting. And I don't mean that to disparage any of my colleagues. I worked with many, many great people. But if I look back over the last several jobs I've had, from each company, there's anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 people that I remain in contact with after I leave the company. So that's how I define a truly meaningful and long-lasting relationship. Who would I choose to remain in contact with after leaving my workplace? And when I think of it that way, I would rather spend as much social time and energy as I have with those sorts of people rather than the random person my boss selected to do fulfillment or whatever the role is. So by working from home, even though I'm isolated socially for 8 hours of the day, that leaves me in the evenings and the weekends with more social energy to spend with people that I feel are more important to me. I also prefer to spend my social energy and time doing social activities. You know, I mean, I'd rather invest that energy in having a beer with my friends, or going hiking or camping or whatever it is I prefer to do in my social time, rather than complaining about how somebody in the cubicle next to me chews too loudly, or the silly policies that management has put in place this week, or whatever annoying things we might talk about at work. Of course, that's not to say that all work conversation is annoying. Some of it really is fun, and I have had great times at work conversations. All that said, a partner who doesn't have a remote job can be a challenge. It's common that I'm ready to go out when my wife is ready to go to bed, because she just spent all of her social energy at work that day, and she doesn't want to do anything. So I don't have great advice here, except be open and honest with your partner if this situation affects you. Of course, during COVID, I suppose more or less we're all at home, so it's not, and we can't go out anyway, even if we want to. But generally speaking, this is something that I think is important. So some other tips to help if you disagree with me on some of these things about how great working from home is for social reasons. One thing I love to do when I can is work from a cafe. Just that social interaction I get from talking to the waiter or waitress can be enough to sort of cure the cabin fever I might otherwise feel. Co-working spaces are great. I've never used a co-working space, but I know many people who do, and they like that. Especially if you work for an all-remote company and you feel like you want an office environment, this is one way to get that. And you work from a friend or colleague's house is another option. If your friends and colleagues live closely enough to you and also work remotely. And something I do frequently when I work remote is I attend professional meetups or conferences. You can also do courses. And then you can also do non-professional meetups and courses. I like salsa dancing, so that's one way to socialize when I'm not working in the office. And another small piece of advice, do more frequent and shorter social events. You know, this is just my own experience. When I worked from the office, I would frequently, every night of the week, I go home, and then maybe once a week, probably on a weekend, maybe Friday or night, I go out with my friends. And because I haven't been out, I spend 4 or 5 hours out. When I work from home, I find that I don't feel the need to spend 4 or 5 hours at a time with my friends. Maybe 1 hour or 2 hours, 2 or 3 times a week is enough, possibly with a smaller group of friends. So that's one way I like to help balance the remote isolation with social time. Let's talk about focusing a little bit. This is another reason, this is probably the main reason I started to work from home. I told you about the 1 week sprint we did to develop a feature. And the reason we chose to work from home was specifically for the focus. But focus can be challenging too. I think the most important thing when you're dealing with this is to know yourself. Know what triggers your distractions. Know what helps you to focus and adapt. The advice I can offer here is mostly related to myself. Some of it's more general, but none of this is expected to be applicable to everybody. You need to pick and choose the bits that work for you and experiment until you find something that works well. It's really important to find or create a distraction-free work area. I have a dedicated desk where I'm sitting right now for my work. I don't always work from here. Sometimes I work from the sofa. Sometimes I work from the bed. But if I find that I'm having difficulty focusing in some other location, I can always come back to my desk, and I know that's my work area. My wife knows that it's my work area, and that when I'm here, that she's not supposed to come start conversations about whatever she saw the neighbors doing over lunch or something like that. So that relates to keeping your family or pets out of your workspace. Again, if you need to. It's not always necessary. It could depend a lot. I mean, a lot of people like to work with their pets. That's fine. But if your pet is a distraction and keeps you from working, then know yourself and know that you need to close the door and keep the pets out. Know that you need to let your partner or your children, if you have them, respect your work area. And when the door is closed, that means daddy or mommy is working, and stay away and come back later. One of the hardest ones for me is to learn to close or to silence distracting tools. This can be anything from your mobile phone to email notifications to Slack to a telephone ringing, the doorbell, whatever. If you find something that's distracting you, find a way to distance yourself from it and close it off. And a change of scenery. I mentioned working at a cafe or co-working space. I actually find that when I go to a cafe, I find it easier to focus than I do when I'm at home in many cases. It depends maybe on what I'm working on, but for some, I guess it's a mental thing for me. I know that when I go to a cafe, I'm there to work. I usually order a drink or a meal, but I can focus really well. And it also helps that although there's people there, they're strangers, so they're not going to be coming up and starting conversations. So sometimes when I need some extra focus, I just I tell my wife, hey, I'm going to a cafe today. I'll be back in 4 or 5 hours. And I get some really good work done that way. There are a lot of focusing techniques. Some of you may have heard of the Pomodoro method. It's basically set a 20-minute timer and don't allow yourself to be distracted until the timer goes off. There are many other techniques you can use. If you're interested, 2 books I can highly recommend are Deep Work and Indistractable. I'll give you links to those at the end, or Mark can send them to you all by email afterwards too. Deep Work comes highly recommended. I read it a couple years ago. I've read several books by that author. It's really good. It's basically about, he looks at several people, including authors and artists, and how did they get the most inspirational work done, and how can you copy that. And a lot of it is basically learn when you need to be isolated and isolate yourself so that you can focus on what you're working on. That's not to say that there aren't times to collaborate. We'll get to that next. And Indistractable I read very recently, just a couple weeks ago. And it's basically a list of techniques and tricks, like the Pomodoro method, of ways that you can optimize your time to focus and not be distracted. Collaboration is always a challenge. It's always a challenge. It's more of a challenge when you're remote, I think. I think the biggest piece of advice I can offer on this point is that using different tools isn't enough. Remote collaboration truly requires a different mindset and a different approach. Just finding the latest web tool to do scrum planning or to do brainstorming sessions or whatever by the web, those tools are fine, but they won't solve this problem of remote collaboration. There is kind of a surface area Band-Aid fix rather than a true fix. What's really needed is an asynchronous culture mindset. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. One thing is that an asynchronous mindset can be slower, but it produces better results, or often produces better results. And let me give an example of what I mean by asynchronous. Suppose that we're planning a new feature in a piece of software. One way to do that is to get together and with 10 people, the developers, the designers, your product owners, etc., and discuss what's going to go into it, what requirements are, possible solutions, etc. You can do all that in a room, maybe spend an hour or 2 hours doing a brainstorming session, write some user stories. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't work remote, or it doesn't work well remote. An asynchronous approach would be, rather than doing a brainstorming session, you have maybe a Google Doc with a brainstorming document, and it's a living document that everybody can participate in. They can add their comments, they can add notes, they can do their own modifications, and so you do this asynchronously. It doesn't require everybody's involved at the same time. You could have this document live for the course of a week, for example, and make sure everybody knows the document and everybody updates it daily with, or at least checks in on it daily to see if there's new comments that are relevant to them. And the result of this can be a better solution. Maybe you have, but by spending a week discussing this in a document, you may come up with more and better ideas than you could in a 2-hour brainstorming session. But it does take a lot longer. So that's an example of what I mean by an asynchronous collaboration rather than a synchronous collaboration. In the long term, asynchronous work, remote work, increases your work in progress, but that's okay. And let me give an example of that. So I'm a software developer. I didn't mention that earlier, but I'm a software developer mostly. And when I work with in the office, suppose that I've written a new feature and it's almost ready, but there's one little question I have. I need to go ask somebody about what's the widget I need to connect to or something. I can just go over and talk to them at their desk and get the answer quickly. In a remote or an asynchronous workflow, instead of walking to their desk or sending a Slack, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mention them probably on the pull request or the issue related to that new topic and say, hey, coworker's name, what do I need to do here? And I ask them a question, and then I go do something else. So that work is still in progress. So it adds to my WIP, but it's waiting on somebody else. So what that probably means is I need to be capable, I need to have 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 things in progress at any given time, because some of them may be waiting on an asynchronous response from someone else, whether that's a colleague or a third-party vendor or whatever. So that's what I mean by work in progress tends to increase when you go asynchronous. But that's okay as long as you keep your WIP, of course, in check. Remote collaboration also encourages more self-discovery. And this goes back to what I mentioned on a previous slide, where I think that remote communication, remote work, tends to improve the quality of communication. I don't know how often you guys experience this, but I've definitely had cases where somebody comes to me every 20 minutes and asks a new question. I've been guilty myself, where I go ask questions more often than I should. By going remote, and particularly going asynchronous, and you tend to do that less. If it's harder for me, if the barrier to asking is higher, I tend to do more research before I ask, and I discover that often I can find an answer on my own without interrupting somebody else. So that's a potential advantage, and it can be a very big advantage if it's fully exploited. That leads to the option to batch your interruptions. So when I do have questions, maybe I can write down my questions on a Post-it or in Notepad or something. And when I develop 3 or 4 questions for one person, I can ask them all at once. Maybe because their shift has just started. You know, if I'm waiting for somebody in a different time zone, then I'm kind of forced to batch my questions anyway. But it could also just be a good discipline to do that regardless of time zones. And then the same for responses. Maybe you can get 4 or 5 questions from somebody and wait until you have several questions and answer them all simultaneously in a single email rather than 5 emails or 5 Slack chats. And then the theme I've been talking about here is to prefer asynchronous communication. So I want to talk a little bit about asynchronous tools. This is, honestly, I believe that this can benefit any organization, whether you're remote or not, but it's more important when you're remote. So if you're aiming for asynchronous communication, you want to prioritize permanent documentation. That could be anything like a wiki. It could be a Google Doc, or wherever your company stores long-lived documentation. Maybe it's Confluence or wherever. A simple, easy practice to help improve this is when somebody asks you a question, regardless of how they ask, if they ask by email, by Slack, in person, rather than simply answering their question, write a document that answers the question and then send them the link to the documentation. This is a great way to build your documentation quickly, and it's a great way to save time, especially if you find yourself answering the same question 3 or 4 times because you're the expert on some subject at work, and every time a new person starts to come ask you, write it down, put it in a document, and free yourself from answering that question frequently. After permanent documentation, I tend to prefer an issue tracker, whether that's a customer-facing issue tracker or bug tracker, whatever kind of issue tracker you might have. Put as many conversations in that issue tracker as possible. If you have an ad hoc conversation over Slack or over coffee, even if you're in the office, put the conclusion in the issue tracker. That provides asynchronous context for anybody who's in a different time zone or a different place, or who just wasn't in the office that day because they were sick or they were taking their kids to the doctor or whatever. By documenting it in an issue tracker, you break that synchronous mindset and allow people who are not directly involved in the conversation to be involved. Next, I use email. So if I have a non-urgent request that's for an individual, I tend to use email. Maybe I need to ask, what's the new tool to request time off? So I email the HR person or whatever. Prefer email over Slack or other real-time communication if it's not urgent. Finally, I come to chat, things like Slack. I use this when it's urgent, or maybe urgent isn't the right word, but timely, when it won't matter in an hour. And then finally, the last thing on my list is video and phone calls. There are definitely times and places for video calls and phone calls. I think this presentation is a good example of something like that. But whenever possible, I try to record those so that people who didn't make it can participate later. So I think the most important thing I can stress here is that important decisions and announcements should not be done in real-time formats, whether that's chat or video calls. They should be done in documentation or email, something that's asynchronous, so that people aren't left out. And yeah, record if you do a chat or video, record it. Recording a conversation in Slack is fairly easy too. You can give links to Slack, and most chat tools do that. All of that said, after talking about all the ways to not rely on face-to-face communication, it's still very important. Humans are social creatures. We need human interaction just to maintain our sanity. And even companies that are fully remote recognize this. Some types of collaboration definitely require being in the same room. You can get a different quality of creativity when you're all huddled around a whiteboard, or you're all talking in the same room for whatever it is. Depending on the kind of work you're doing and what kind of creativity you need, you can definitely get a better quality when you're in the same room. And then team and relationship building is just much harder to do remotely. So with this in mind, I like to get together. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But I like to get together physically with my team, even when I'm on a remote company. So from a team perspective, I want to talk about some random thoughts, I guess. Partially remote teams are very destructive, in my opinion, in my experience. A partially remote team often happens when one person at a traditional company, one person decides to move to a new country or new city, and they're senior enough and valuable enough. The company doesn't want to let them go, so they agree to let them work from some other city and join by Skype or something. That can work. I mean, I've seen it work sometimes, but the risk there, and the risk of any partly remote team, is that the people who are not physically together tend to be treated as second-class team members. They aren't involved in all the decisions that are made. They miss out on a lot of conversations. I mean, conversations just that happen in the hallway tend to get lost, and it's not nobody's fault. It's not that anybody's trying to exclude them. It's just a natural way of working. So for that reason, I prefer to avoid partly remote teams, unless the people who are remote don't mind being left out. If they don't mind and it's not hurting the team, then of course, who am I to judge? But But if there's a risk of it being a problem, then I prefer to avoid that. Your team should be 100% remote or 100% in the office. You shouldn't have this split. The same goes with asynchronous teams. So this would be if you're separated by time zones, whether you have offices or not. Whoever's in a different time zone tends to be left out, and that happens at my current work because half of our company is in Europe and half is in Latin America. The half in Europe tends to have conversations while the Latin Americans are sleeping, and then vice versa. The Latin Americans have conversations while the Europeans are having dinner. So it's best to not do that on a team basis. In other words, have all of your team, a single team in one time zone, and do the split between team boundaries, if that makes sense, whenever possible. And I often find that the less experienced, more junior team members have the hardest time with these sorts of remote work, especially when it comes to these communication dynamics. And that's natural. It's not a judgment against people less experienced. It just takes a while to learn the tricks and the tips to work this way. One example I like of avoiding this partially remote team is the company Elastic. I'm sure you've all heard of Elasticsearch, or many of you have heard of Elasticsearch. Well, that company, I interviewed for them a few years ago, and at the time they had just acquired a company in Sweden, I think. And they told me that they had acquired this company, and they were paying everybody at the office to relocate to different cities. So that they were so committed to avoiding this partly remote team concept that they were paying people to relocate away from an office so that they would be forced to work remotely. So that's high dedication in my mind. All right, from a business perspective, I'm going to breeze through this. I don't think this matters to most people, but I've been in the remote workforce on both sides of the scenario, in the sense that I've been just a programmer. I've also been a manager. One advantage to the company of remote work is you have this bigger geographic talent pool. If you're willing to hire people in any city, you can hire potentially thousands of people who can apply for a role, rather than just the 20 or so in your city. On the other hand, you have a smaller demographic talent pool because you have to hire somebody who wants to work for a remote company. You probably need to hire somebody with more experience. It's harder to hire interns or juniors into a remote first company. And as I've been already talking about, remote only is better than, quote, remote friendly. I find remote friendly companies, Teamwork is an example where I worked before, to kind of almost be a lie. There's a lot of problems that come with that. And as I mentioned before, remote companies do tend to grow more slowly, and I think that's related to the challenges of communication, and that you can only hire, generally you can hire more advanced, more experienced developers, or people. I shouldn't say developers, anybody. So those are things that make the company grow more slowly. On the other hand, remote companies may, depending on the industry you're in, be more resilient. A remote company is less likely to have problems due to economic downfall in a particular city. Salaries can be tricky. If you have two equally qualified people, one in India and one in the Netherlands, do you give them both the same salary? Is that fair? That the one in India is essentially making X times more than in terms of real value than the one in the Netherlands? On the other hand, if you give them location adjusted salaries, is that fair? I don't know the answer to this one. It's tricky. I just mentioned it because it wouldn't be complete otherwise. That's my presentation. I would love to answer any questions that I can.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you are, you were talking about having many works in progress, but doesn't that also slow you down due to the context switching you have to keep doing? Yes. Yeah, that really bugs me, especially the more complicated the code is that you're working with, the harder it is to get back into it.
Yes, definitely that can be an issue. I don't know if there's a good answer for that. I mean, I would want to ask you a bunch of questions about the specific stuff you're working on. I mean, so for example, I like to keep my pull requests as small as possible anyway. A rule of thumb I like to use with my teams is If a pull request takes more than 10 or 15 minutes to review, it's too big. So if I follow that rule and keep my pull requests small, then it shouldn't. Then the context switching shouldn't be that expensive anyway. I mean, if somebody else can review it in 15 minutes, I can probably get my head back around it in 2 minutes. In most cases, there can always be exceptions. So that would be one thing I would say. Definitely, I mean, there's definitely more context switching, and that's one reason we want to keep WIP limits low anyway. So I don't know if I have a solution to that other than just recognizing that it's part of the nature of asynchronous work.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
I have a question. Yeah. Yes, hello. There was mentioned in the slides that juniors tend to have the hardest time during remote work. And I wonder if there are some tips, how can we help them out? Because apparently we have an intern in our team. And basically when he joined, we went remotely and maybe we're missing something.
You said it's a he?
Sorry?
It's a guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, so has he expressed any problems or frustrations unique to him that we could address?
Well, he looks great actually. When he asks questions, we answer them. So far, I couldn't notice that something is wrong. But I mean, sometimes maybe you just don't see it.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe we could communicate him often, or yeah. I know that one of our developers found some online pair programming tool.
Oh, good.
So probably that's also a nice thing.
I think just pay extra attention. The experience I've had with more junior employees doing remote work is they just need more hand-holding. I mean, that's true even when you're in person. They need more instruction and more guidance. And it's easy to forget that when you don't see them physically next to you looking confused. So I would say spend the extra effort to check in frequently. Make sure they understand what's going on. And of course, it depends a lot on the person. Some people are afraid to ask questions, and that would be the worst kind of person to be doing this. If they're afraid when they don't know something, they're afraid to ask, then it's going to be that much more challenging when you can't see them physically. If they're good at asking questions and they're very proactive, it may not be a problem at all for you. So yeah, I would just say pay extra attention to them. Make sure that they're being checked in on frequently, and if anything comes up, address it as quickly as you can.
Okay, clear. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I guess I have another one then.
Yeah.
How are you experiencing this kind of working from home during COVID-19 versus regular working from home?
Yeah.
What's the difference for you?
The main difference for me is that all that social stuff I talked about, I can't do that. So I can't go out and have dinner with friends or with my wife. We're finding ways to cope. We've started inviting friends to our house every couple of weeks, a couple, so that we only increase our exposure by exposure point by one, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's a challenge for me. I think it's a challenge for everybody. Is right now we're unable to be social in any form, really, working or otherwise. So, yeah, if you're in a low risk group, I guess my advice would be to try to be social in a responsible way. Be socially responsible socially.
Yeah. And one more. When do you know that you should take a break? Do you take breaks at like fixed points in the day? Because sometimes, like especially at 4 o'clock, man, that's a hard time for me. I'm always just dipping hard. So yeah, I always find it nice to just lay on my bed for like 5 minutes and just relax and do nothing, and then come back.
Yeah, I listen to my body. I think this one's going to depend a lot on who you work for. Also, my personal view is that 8 hours a day is an artificial time frame. And I mean, I don't know what kind of work all of you do, but I mean, as a software developer, I can't work 8 hours straight most days. There are some days I can, but most days I can't. most days I get 4 or 5 hours of solid coding in, and I'm exhausted. I could maybe attend a meeting after that, but I'm not going to produce quality code. So I'm not afraid to end my day early if I've been productive. I guess I also have this idea that by working from home, I'm probably much more productive than I would have been if I'd been in the office. So if I did a 5-hour solid chunk of code, I've done more than I would have if I'd been in the office for 8 hours, if that makes sense. So I feel less guilty about ending my day a little bit early under those circumstances. Of course, that's not an excuse to go the opposite and just say, oh, I've been sitting at my office desk for 5 hours. I'm going to quit now. It only works if you're truly productive. And of course, as I mentioned, it depends on the policy of your company, if they're as flexible and understanding as I am or not. But having said that, yeah, I definitely listen to my body. There are definitely times when I need to just take a break, and I do. I'm not really a slave to the clock, except when I have meetings. So yeah, I listen to my body. I take a break. Sometimes I take a break and I come back a couple hours later if I have some inspiration or a new wind.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I have one more question regarding the new joining of the colleagues. I have noticed during this period, companies are really struggling to onboard new people. So what is your remark on that part? Because I think it's very challenging for some people.
Yeah. I think that goes kind of to the point about juniors. And so it depends a lot. I mean, in the sense that maybe they're not juniors in the workforce, but maybe they're juniors to the remote idea working, the idea of remote working. So the company I work for now is mostly remote, and we've onboarded people even since COVID started. We mailed them laptops and sent them the credentials for our Slack and email, and then from there we did everything online. So I recall, so we did that shortly after the lockdown began. We onboarded 5 people, I think, in one day. It was the most that our company had onboarded at one time. So I scheduled a Zoom call with everybody just to do introductions. We same as you would do in the office. You know, what's your name? What's your previous company? Maybe something interesting about yourself. And then we scheduled another one for them to meet all the developers. So there were 30 people in that call, and it was just a quick, everybody tell us what you're doing. It was essentially the same thing you do when you walk around the office and introduce somebody. We just did it in Zoom. So.
Okay, but expecting the speed of the new colleague to be the same as you are expecting it in the office, it works like that?
It depends. It depends. Yeah. It depends a lot on the individual. If they have experience doing remote work, so the same day we onboarded those 5 people, many of them had already been working remote, and within 3 days they were doing stuff that I would not have expected most people to be doing 3 days later. You know, in the sense that they were very, very productive very quickly. One of them had worked at GitLab before, which is a purely remote company, so he had a lot of experience doing that. If you're talking about somebody who's never worked remotely before, it's definitely going to take longer. Working remote is a skill set. I mean, so my wife, it took my wife 2 or 3 weeks after COVID to really start to feel productive again. So I would expect the same with anybody who's never worked remote.
Yeah, why I'm asking this question because, why I'm asking this, my husband just joined a company during this period, and there was a lot of, not clarity who is going to give what, who is going to do that things. So that things come into action, and I personally believe that companies should have start not thinking about the remote onboarding of the colleagues.
What we've done at Lana is we have an onboarding document. Honestly, I think this is a good idea at any company, but maybe it's more important at a remote. And it's sort of step by step. Here's what you do to set up your. So again, we're developers, to set up your review environment, to start developing. Here's the links to the important Slack channels. Here's the links to all the tools that we use, et cetera, et cetera. And one important thing that we do is every time somebody onboards, we say, you're not done onboarding until you submitted a pull request to change this, to correct something.
That's nice.
So every time somebody is onboarded, they improve the process for the next onboarder, even if it's just fixing a typo. Often it's more than that. It's like this whole section was missing. I didn't know how to do this thing. But, I'm glad you told us that. We'll improve that for next time. So that goes back to the asynchronous documentation stuff I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get it perfect the first time. We don't have it perfect at Lana. But if you start the process, it will get better every time. Continuous improvement is the best way.
Thanks for.
And the short one, do you have any routines which help you start and then decompress for work? Because even if you have an office, it's still the same home, right? So it's easy to blend into environments. So do you have any things that you do to start work and then to finish your day and just shut off?
I don't have routines per se. I know many people who do. I guess I've never found that to be necessary. I do separate my work and my play time, if you will. I only open my work Slack and my work email on my work computer. My laptop and my mobile phone don't have those. And I make similar rules for other things. For example, Facebook I find to be distracting. So I only use Facebook on my phone where I'm never tempted to write long political rants. When I use Facebook on my desktop, maybe somebody says somebody's wrong on the internet, so I have to fix it. I never do that on my phone because it's just too much hassle. So
That's true.
Some habits like that I do. And by having my work space in one designated area, then when I'm in other areas, it's easier to do something else. So yeah, I keep my work life as much as possible off of my mobile phone. My colleagues know how to contact me in an emergency, but I don't participate in work Slack chats or whatever on my phone or on my personal laptop. So that's one thing I do. I do know many people who have, and I've heard of people who have routines like you said. I recently heard a podcast from somebody who had a mental exercise. I can't remember the phrase they would use, but they would say, commencing all activity in 3, 2, 1, or something like that. And then that was their mental cue to shut off work, and now they're in their personal life. So yeah, if it works for you, do it. If it works, do it. I haven't found that necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Well, hey, thanks everyone for participating. I hope you enjoyed the presentation as much as I enjoyed preparing it. If you have more questions, you can always find me on Twitter or my website or send me an email. I'm happy to provide insight whenever I can.